So for years now, you've probably sat in meetings or read these industry articles or watched keynote presentations where someone leans right into the microphone and confidently declares, data is the new oil.
Oh, yeah. It is the ultimate corporate cliche at this point. I mean, it
Mm.
sounds incredibly visionary right up until you try to apply any, real-world accounting to it.
Right, and that is exactly the problem. Because if you push a CEO on that metaphor, if you ask them, okay, how many barrels of this oil do we actually have in the vault, and what is the exact spot price today,
Yeah,
the whole concept just completely falls apart.
it does. It's always treated as this abstract operational byproduct, right?
Mhm.
Just the digital exhaust a company makes while doing other things.
Exactly. But what if a country actually figured out how to put a strict legal numerical price tag on it?
Meaning you could actually audit it or depreciate it or borrow against it just like you would with, a warehouse full of physical machinery or real estate.
Right. And that is our mission for today's deep dive. We are looking at a source document titled The Financial Architecture of Data Governance in India. And our goal here is to explore how India is really pioneering this framework to transform data from a vague concept into a quantifiable financial asset, like one sitting on a literal double entry balance sheet.
And I mean, in a world where every single industry is just drowning in information overload, understanding how a massive digital economy actually measures value, it isn't just a theoretical exercise anymore.
No, not at all.
It fundamentally changes the mechanics of how every modern business survives, how they secure funding, and how they protect themselves from ruin. You really can't navigate the modern corporate landscape without understanding how the underlying currency is being valued.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because, before a single startup or some massive multinational corporation can value its data, the government itself has to agree that data has actual economic weight.
Right. You cannot have a recognized corporate asset without a national consensus defining what an asset even is.
Exactly. So let's start with the macro shift that's happening at the policy level. Looking at the source, the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation in India, which is known as MOSPI, they're actively adopting new guidelines from the United Nations.
Yeah, specifically, they're integrating the UN System of National Accounts for 2025.
And this is a massive shift, right? Because these standards officially recognize data as an economic factor of production.
They are placing it on the exact same tier as labor, capital, and land.
Wow. And simultaneously, you have the Comptroller and Auditor General of India, the CAG, and their mandate is to figure out how to capture the intrinsic value of massive public data repositories.
Which is incredibly difficult. They're walking a very thin tightrope there.
Oh, totally. They have to measure this value without compromising national security or, individual privacy. It's kind of like, think about it like a government waking up one morning and realizing that their vast, unmapped national forests aren't just empty green spaces on a map. They are a highly measurable, incredibly valuable timber asset. The real challenge is figuring out how to measure the total value of the timber without actually chopping down the forest or disrupting the ecosystem.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it highlights why this matters on a macroeconomic scale. To build a functional digital economy, the state absolutely must establish a uniform measuring stick.
Right.
Consider all the public sector undertakings, right? The state-owned railways, the public health infrastructure, the government exchanges. They are producing petabytes of data daily.
An unbelievable amount.
Right, and if the government doesn't know how to value what its own entities are producing, it cannot accurately measure its gross domestic product in the 21st century. So establishing how to categorize and track these public data assets, it's the foundational step of a completely new economic era.
But, okay, if data is a valuable asset like timber, we have to look at the flip side of that. Like, what happens when it goes bad? Or what happens if a company acquires it illegally or even just carelessly?
Well, the moment that happens, it ceases to be an asset entirely and flips straight to the other side of the ledger.
Which leads us directly into the regulatory drivers that are forcing companies to rethink their entire infrastructure. Because for the last 2 decades, the default corporate strategy was just blind accumulation.
Oh, absolutely. Hoard every click, every email, every location ping, and just figure out how to monetize it later.
Right, the mentality was just that storage is cheap, so keep everything forever. There was no perceived downside to hoarding.
Not at all.
But the source points out that the rollout of India's Digital Personal Data Protection Act, the DPDPA, has completely destroyed that hoarding strategy. The penalty for noncompliance under this act can reach up to 250 crore rupees per instance.
Which is staggering.
Yeah, to put that in perspective for a global listener, that is roughly 30 million US dollars per violation. That's a company-ending number.
It really is.
Suddenly, unconsented data, or poorly structured data, or what the source calls zombie data, it's no longer just sitting quietly on a server. It is an active, highly volatile liability. It's like hoarding data isn't like hoarding gold anymore. It's like hoarding uranium.
What's fascinating here is the psychological paradigm shift this forces on corporate boards.
Yeah.
That is a very precise way to look at it, by the way.
Rep.
Uranium is incredibly valuable if you are running a nuclear reactor, but the handling requirements are intense.
Right. If you don't store uranium properly in heavily regulated containers, or if you lose track of its shelf life, it becomes highly toxic. It becomes dangerous and exorbitantly expensive just to hold on to. You have to literally pay to get rid of it safely.
And we are moving past the era where data was evaluated purely through the lens of potential future monetization. The upside is now inherently tied to statutory liability.
Right, yeah.
IT departments and compliance officers, they're being forced to actively filter and aggressively purge their data sets just to compute what the source calls their clean data volume.
Because holding on to the dirty data is essentially sitting on a financial landmine that regulators can detonate at literally any moment.
Exactly. And the mechanism of this new reality is incredibly volatile. Under this model, the financial value of a data set depreciates or evaporates entirely the very second a data principal, meaning the everyday user, withdraws their consent.
Just instantly.
Instantly. And the same thing happens if the original business purpose for processing that data expires.
Wait, I want to make sure I am grasping the actual mechanics of that depreciation.
Sure.
So a company could have a highly structured data set of user purchasing habits, and let's say it's valued at $1 million on a Tuesday. But on Wednesday, if a massive segment of those users clicks unsubscribe or revokes their consent under the new regulations, that $1 million asset on the balance sheet literally vanishes overnight.
It doesn't just vanish. That is the critical distinction here.
Okay.
It transforms from a $1 million asset into a potential $30 million liability if the company's systems don't immediately locate and purge that specific data from their servers.
Oh, wow. That is terrifying.
It really creates a dynamic living balance sheet where asset value is inextricably linked to real-time compliance.
That poses a massive logistical nightmare for a chief financial officer. I mean, if clean data is an asset and toxic data is a liability, how do you actually put a specific legally binding rupee value on it in the first place?
That's the big question.
Especially when traditional accounting standards are just famously hostile to this kind of thing. The source mentioned something called IND AS 38, which seems to be a major roadblock.
Yeah, IND AS 38 is the Indian accounting standard for intangible assets. And it is very conservative, much like international accounting standards. Traditional accounting hates capitalizing internally generated intangible assets.
Because there's no receipt.
Exactly. An accountant wants a receipt. They want to see what you paid a third party to acquire something so they can verify the concrete cost. They do not like assigning value to a database you slowly built yourself over, say, 5 years.
So the traditional accountants are just throwing their hands up and refusing to play ball.
Pretty much.
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. India is pioneering indigenous institutional frameworks to step into this massive void. We're looking at two main acronyms in the source material, DGPSI and DVSI. Let's break down the first one. DGPSI stands for the Data Governance and Protection Standard of India. And it was developed by an organization called the FDPPI, the Foundation of Data Protection Professionals in India. This group essentially looked at that accounting gap and created a framework that embeds financial data valuation directly into corporate governance.
Yes.
Specifically, they mandate a rule called Model Implementation Specification 9, or MIS-9.
MIS-9. It's a very administrative-sounding name for a rule that radically alters board responsibility.
It explicitly requires corporate boards to establish a policy that assigns a notional financial value to distinct data sets under their control. So it forces the board to actually have visibility into the economic worth of the digital property they're overseeing, rather than just letting the IT department handle it in the basement.
Right. And they also introduced a metric called the Data Trust Score, or DTS. Yeah. This score acts as an indicator to prove how a company's privacy and compliance measures directly protect the baseline value of that data asset.
Okay, I have to push back on this a little bit on behalf of anyone listening who has ever sat through a grueling financial audit.
Fair enough.
Because a notional financial value sounds an awful lot like corporate speak for a made-up number. I mean, if I am an auditor or a potential investor looking at a balance sheet, how can I rely on a dynamic trust score for something as rigid and unforgiving as corporate accounting?
Look, that skepticism is entirely justified, and it is the exact reason traditional accounting boards have avoided the issue for so long.
Right.
But when those boards leave a void and the market demands a way to measure a company's worth, you have to create a structured methodology to estimate that worth. Otherwise, investors and regulators are flying completely blind.
Which is worse.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You start with an estimated or notional value, and then you apply rigorous math to it. Which brings us to the second framework you mentioned, DVSI.
The Data Valuation Standard of India.
Yes. Operating alongside those governance rules, this DVSI model introduces a very specific two-stage valuation methodology to answer the exact skepticism you just raised.
Okay, how does it work?
Stage 1 is traditional math. You calculate the intrinsic cost of the data, like what were the server costs, the acquisition costs, or what are the current market parameters for a similar data set.
Okay, so you establish a hard baseline number first. That makes sense.
Yes, but stage 2 is where it actually adapts to the digital reality. You apply a dynamic multiplier index to that baseline cost.
A multiplier.
Right. And this multiplier isn't random. It fluctuates based on strict auditable criteria, legal compliance, the accuracy of the data, and the level of cryptographic protection securing it.
Okay, let me walk through a hypothetical to see if I have the mechanism right here.
Yeah.
Let's say a company spends ₹1,000,000 acquiring a massive list of user data. That is the baseline cost.
Correct.
But an auditor comes in and finds that this data is sitting completely unencrypted on some outdated, vulnerable server. Does that multiplier drag the recognized value down?
It drags it down to practically zero.
Wow, just wipes it out.
Because the risk of a data breach and the subsequent regulatory fines we talked about completely offsets the acquisition cost. The formula dictates that unencrypted data holds no functional value because it is overwhelmingly likely to become a massive liability.
Right.
And to enforce this, the source notes the creation of a new organization, the Association of Independent Data Auditors, or AAI. They are actively training and impaneling professionals called Certified Independent Data Auditors, or CIDAs.
So we are literally watching the birth of an entirely new profession here.
We are.
We have auditors who don't just look at financial receipts. They actually treat server architectures like bank vaults. How do they even do that in practice?
Well, and CIDA combines traditional compliance testing with advanced IT auditing. They don't just ask if you have an encryption policy on paper. They inspect the cryptographic logs.
They verify it.
Exactly. They verify the consent management systems to ensure that when a user clicks unsubscribe, the data is actually purged across all backup servers, not just hidden from the marketing dashboard. They're the ones who validate that multiplier.
That is fascinating. And to really prove that these valuation frameworks aren't just, theoretical boardroom math, we have to look at the ultimate stress test for any asset class.
The worst case scenario.
Right. What happens when the music stops? What happens when a company runs out of money, defaults on its loans, and goes bankrupt?
Insolvency is the most brutal, realistic arena for asset valuation. If an asset has no real-world value, the bankruptcy process exposes that immediately.
So what does this all mean? The source dives into how this is playing out under the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code of 2016, the IBC. In India right now, resolution professionals, the officials appointed to liquidate a dead company and pay back creditors, they are constantly encountering a very modern scenario.
Yeah, it's very common now.
Yeah. They walk into the headquarters of a failed startup. Maybe it's a fintech platform or some e-commerce provider that burned through all its venture capital.
And they look around and find absolutely zero physical assets.
Right. The laptops are leased, the real estate is rented, and there is no physical inventory whatsoever.
Nothing to sell off.
Nothing. But the company possesses massive, highly structured user databases and proprietary transaction algorithms.
This raises an important question, though, right? What does this all mean for the banks and creditors who are legally entitled to get their money back?
Well, it is remarkably similar to a famous but bankrupt restaurant.
Right.
They owe the bank millions, but the commercial ovens are leased and the dining room tables are worn out and virtually worthless. The bank cannot recoup millions by auctioning off used silverware.
No.
The only thing of actual undeniable value that can be auctioned off to save them is the executive chef's secret recipe book and the VIP customer reservation list. The intrinsic value of the business lived in that information all along.
And how the legal system currently handles that digital recipe book is crucial. 10 years ago, when a company went under and the cloud servers were shut off for non-payment, that data might have just vanished into the ether. Nobody knew how to price it.
Right. But the landscape has completely shifted. According to the source, under Section 36 of the IBC, courts and liquidators are treating these data stacks as intangible corporate property.
Meaning they're fully functional legal assets.
Exactly. To get money back to the creditors, liquidators are utilizing what the source calls income or market-driven slump sales.
And a slump sale being a transaction where the entire business, or a major division like its database, is sold off as a single lump sum package to the highest bidder, rather than trying to value and sell off individual user profiles piecemeal.
Yes, and it is happening right now in the courts. Liquidators are auctioning off these databases based on raw market demand. It is the most concrete financial realization of data value in the economy today.
Which really brings this entire analysis full circle.
It does.
When you synthesize the macro government policies adopting UN standards, the severe regulatory penalties for hoarding toxic data, the meticulous new valuation standards like DVSI, and then the harsh reality of bankruptcy auctions, they all converge on one inevitable destination for corporate governance.
The data balance sheet.
Yes. The source explicitly builds on this premise, detailing a double-entry governance framework. This means that any personal data under a company's management must be accounted for simultaneously as two things.
Okay, what are they?
First, it is an economic asset that drives revenue and bolsters corporate valuation. Second, it is a corresponding contingent liability, a permanent shadow on the ledger that accounts for potential data breaches, regulatory fines, and the sheer cost of securing it.
So they are linked.
Inseparably. You simply cannot claim the asset value without legally booking the associated risk.
So, if you are an executive or a founder listening to this, the ultimate takeaway is a stark warning. If you are waiting for standard, traditional accounting boards to hand you a comfortable, rigid template for how to handle your data, you are exposing your company to existential risk.
You are. The digital landscape is moving much too fast for the old guard of accounting to keep up. The precedents are being set in real time by data protection acts and bankruptcy courts, not by traditional accountants.
Relying on frameworks like DGPSI to understand exactly what data you possess, the mathematical value it generates, and critically, the toxic risks it carries, that is no longer an optional compliance choice for overachievers. It is a baseline requirement for modern corporate survival.
Absolutely.
Running a company today without knowing your exact data liability isn't like flying a plane without a dashboard. It's like buying a massive, expensive mansion without bothering to check if the foundation is slowly sinking into a sinkhole. The collapse is invisible right up until it's sudden and total.
Right. If you don't know the exact rupee value of your data and the precise liability of holding it, you don't actually know what your company is worth. It's that simple.
Before we wrap up this deep dive, there is a final thought I want you to consider. Something that builds on everything we've explored today. We started by discussing how data is like timber in a national forest, a resource to be measured, protected, and monetized by companies and governments.
Right. And we have firmly established that data is evolving into a standard, quantifiable line item on a corporate balance sheet.
It is recognized as a literal financial asset with a verifiable market price. So here is the provocative question to mull over as you navigate this space. If the data you generate every single day, your browsing habits, your location history, your purchasing preferences, if that has a concrete financial value that directly boosts a corporation's bottom line, how long until everyday people demand a direct data dividend?
Oh, wow. A literal shareholder stake for the raw personal data they contribute to the ecosystem.
Exactly. If a company can mathematically prove to an auditor that your data is worth a specific amount on their balance sheet, shouldn't the person who supplied that raw material get a cut of the profits?
That is going to be a huge debate.
It is a fascinating dynamic to ponder as this digital economy evolves and as those wild, unmapped forests of data finally get their price tags. Keep your eyes on the ledger.
Thanks for joining us on this deep talk, and we'll catch you next time.